Hello and welcome to this Politico panel event on research and innovation beyond 2020. My name's James Randerson. I'm managing editor with Politico here in Brussels. Now, the coronavirus pandemic has been a time for self-reflection for many of us, stuck at home and not doing many of the things that we would normally do. It's also been an opportunity to think about what Europe should be and what it should be like, where it should go. And I think it's fair to say that it's become very evident that research, science, and innovation have to be at the core of that, both in highlighting the need for biomedical prowess to develop those medicines and vaccines that will hopefully get us out of this mess, but also more broadly in terms of getting us out of the economic mess that we're in, driving growth and being able to seize the opportunities that the new world will allow for us after the virus has hopefully subsided, depending on what we want that new world to look like. At the moment, the moment is a critical juncture, really, to talk about some of these issues, because we have a new budget cycle, obviously, starting in January, subject to resolving the current hiatus. And with that, of course, Horizon Europe, the new funding round for science and innovation. So we'll be talking a lot about that. There's also a new relationship with the US to be forged, with a new administration coming in there, and the need for new thinking about how to deal with China as a research partner, and of course, Brexit happening, we think, probably, at the end of the year. So we'd like to thank very much our partners, eBrains, for making this virtual event possible. You can participate as well by tweeting about the event at Politico Events, and you can ask questions via Slido using the hashtag PoliticoEUResearch, and that is also the hashtag on Twitter too. So if you're following on the event website, on the Politico website, Slido is just underneath the live stream. If you're following on Twitter or on Facebook, you can go to the Slido website and you can use that hashtag there to participate. Again, that's PoliticoEUResearch. I'd invite you to try that now, because we actually have a poll up there sponsored by eBrains, which you can participate in right now. We will have the results live at the end of the discussion. And the question is, do you think the EU has a clear vision for research and innovation? So you can put your votes in there, and we'll come back to that at the end. And just now, before I introduce the panel and our moderator, I'd like to hand over to Pavel Sviboda, the CEO of eBrains, who is our partner for the event. Thank you very much, Pavel.
Thank you very much, James, for this introduction and for doing this event together with us. You are absolutely right that science moved to the center stage of our lives in 2020, like at no time before in our lifetimes. We have waited anxiously for news from the labs. They have now started to come out, but so much is still ahead of us. 2021 will be a year when science will need to mobilize all the power of conviction that it has. And it will need to do so through super great transparency, through openness, and also commitment to improve on the outcomes. The battle for trust in science is really to be held next year. One would wish that this new enlightenment, as one could call it, could be translated into significantly higher funding for research, at least commensurate to the scale of the challenge. This has not quite materialized in this way. Yes, funding for Horizon Europe has been increased in the last round of negotiations. Yes, there is recovery fund money. And some countries are really looking into transformative projects with these resources. Spain, for example, has plans to increase research budget by 60% next year. So money matters because ideas are getting harder and harder to find. Research is simply getting more expensive. Why? Because it is definitely more complex, because we need more interdisciplinary teams in place. So increase in funding is not a luxury, it's actually a precondition of progress. Brain research is a good example of a scientific area where a combined European approach is necessary. Brain, by the way, is probably as complex a scientific question as you can get, with the possible exception of studying the universe. And no country can do it alone. Let's look around. Germany has brain atlasing, has high-performance computing, has neuromorphic computing, but doesn't have everything. France has modeling, has medical applications. Switzerland has simulation. Netherlands has neurotechnology, but no one has everything. We need the European approach to really build something meaningful where we are. And it is a field where a genuine technological revolution is taking place. And it's not just my words, it's also the words of Nobel Prize winners such as Edward Moser. Why is this? It's because only yesterday, neuroscientists were busy studying single neurons. This was the top of the technological means. Today, they can study populations of thousands of neurons in different regions of the brain, across the scales, and over long durations. Decoding the brain is essential for creating pathways towards addressing brain disorders. And the numbers are staggering. 178 million Europeans affected by neurological conditions, going all the way from migraine to Alzheimer. And now, in the pandemic, we also have a mental health emergency growing. So we have a pandemic within the pandemic, which has to be addressed. Brain research is also about technology, and especially artificial intelligence. In fact, there is a synergetic relationship between brain research and AI. AI helps brain science through its pattern recognition technology, but also AI has lots to learn from the brain and how the brain functions. eBrains, the project I am leading together with a distinguished scientific team, is a state-of-the-art enabler to address these challenges, making the most of the technological revolution. Powered by the Human Brain Project, an EU flagship, eBrains stands for European Brain Research Infrastructures. And it is really unlike anything else in the world, because we aim to go deeper into the brain, to the level of the cells, with unmet resolution, and also wider, meaning across the scales. It is also an infrastructure entirely co-created with researchers. So what we aim to do is to encapsulate the winning formula of European research, namely combining best-in-class research infrastructure and fueling it with excellent science. So James, having said this, I very much look forward to a discussion about how we can create a better environment for more impactful research in 2021. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Pavel. I think that's set us up excellently for the discussion. I'm going to introduce our panel and your moderator, and then we'll take it away. So first of all, to my left, socially distant on the stage here, is Natalie Conrad, Research Fellow at Catholic University of Leuven, co-founder of the Rescue Horizon Europe initiative. Welcome. Online, we have Mark Oliver Gewaltig, Chief Technology and Chief Scientific Officer at the AI company Mindfire. We also have Pascal Lamy, obviously former WTO Director General, Vice President of the think tank Europe Jacques Delors, Chair of the Paris Peace Forum, also Chair of the Starfish 2030 Mission Board, which is part of Horizon Europe. We're also joined by Jean-Éric Paquet, the Director General at DG Research and Innovation at just down the road at the European Commission. And last but not least, my colleague and the moderator today is Laura Greenhalgh, who is news editor. Take it away, Laura.
Thank you very much, James, and welcome everyone. We're very happy to have so many of you with us online in this new virtual reality. So with that in mind, I wanted to start today's debate with a perspective from the real world of research and on the reality of life for researchers right now. As we've heard from our introductory remarks, the EU recently concluded major negotiations on its budget that some people feel was not a success story for research and innovation. So, Natalie, I wanted to ask you, are you optimistic about the outlook for researchers in Europe right now?
Well, thank you for asking. Actually, I think many of us researchers feel very pessimistic at the moment. And since I've launched this initiative to safeguard European research budget, I've actually encountered so many young European researchers who face really quite desperate and precarious working conditions, jumping from one fixed-term contract to another, unable to plan their research and their livelihoods, often beyond just a couple of months. And the COVID-19 pandemic and European leaders deciding to cut European research budgets are only going to make matters worse. So, to be honest, no one had expected to see so much disappointment and desperation towards current European research policies. Our call for action to ask European leaders to stand up and support European research has been met with overwhelming support over the past few weeks. Within just a few weeks, we've had 1,500 scientists signing our call for action. Among them are 9 European Nobel laureates. We've had a deluge of universities and universities networks getting in touch with us and joining our campaign. Many of those represent the very hallmark of Europe. And we've also received immense support from the political scene with over 100 members of the European Parliament publicly expressing their support for this cause. And we are only just one of the many initiatives in that field. We follow expressions of concern from literally every single research organization in Europe. A petition from over 25,000 scientists and many, many others, and all of them point to the same direction. And I would like to mention that we as scientists, we don't usually get engaged in political discussions. It's really against our nature. And the revolt we've seen from the European science world over the past few months is really unprecedented. It's how European leaders can decide to cut European research budgets in the middle of a global pandemic will never cease to astonish me. And I am astonished that European leaders have failed to recognize the very dramatic situation the European research community is in at the moment.
So on that point, I'd like to turn to Jean-Eric, the man charged with delivering Europe's research and innovation policy. Obviously, you know, we've heard this quite stark description of how researchers are feeling, some researchers, but obviously not an isolated case. My first question to you, Jean-Eric, is, you know, obviously we're due to have this great flagship program kicking off on January 1st, but right now we still don't have the budget confirmed. So, you know, can you deliver on Horizon Europe if there's no budget in place at the EU level by the end of the year?
I mean, if there is no budget, there is no program, and the program cannot start without an agreement on the MFF, and from the MFF then on the yearly budget 21. So I think it is indeed absolutely essential that member states come together and realize that putting a veto on the MFF, the own resource decision, and with it, in effect, blocking very many programs with high EU added value, for each member state, but then also for the union together. Research, I think, is a good example of that. But if you allow me, I would like to also very briefly react to what I just heard, which I think we need to listen to. It needs to be listened to, and I think it reflects a number of developments. One being indeed the very fragmented nature of research careers in Europe, of course, with differences between member states. But I think it is, of course, in the present pandemic situation, even more visible that many employment conditions of young researchers in particular, but not only young researchers, are very fragile. And this is what is coming to the fore. I would also add here that this also puts often in perspective progress which has been gained on gender and diversity in research, which is being eroded also by the impact of the pandemic on funding, on the timelines for projects, putting all this in perspective. I think we need to listen to that. And this is, I think, very much also what the Commission, of course, Maria Gabriel, as Research Commissioner, is aiming at with the European Research Area, to have a different conversation with member states to help them develop their research and innovation systems, including careers and better careers for research there. There are many components in that discussion. Most of them are not directly EU competence, but that does not mean that this discussion should not take place also at EU level. And an ambitious budget, so means for research organizations and researchers, are a big component of that at EU level. We are discussing it, but also particularly at national level. I'm sure this will come in the discussion as well.
Mm. So turning to you, Pascal, I mean, more than 3 years ago, you were part of an expert group that laid out a vision for EU research and innovation. I'm struck that in the meantime, the EU has really embraced these notions of the European Green Deal as a major policy agenda, the digital agenda. But it feels like, and certainly the results that we saw from our initial poll may indicate that research and innovation is lacking that same profile. So my question to you is, do you agree that this vision hasn't been delivered? And if so, what's the solution?
I think the reality is that so far, the Commission, the Council and the European Parliament have only partially delivered, benchmarked against an ambition which was higher than what has happened. If I'm correct, but I'm sure Jean-Éric Paquet will correct me if I'm wrong, the EU research and development budget for the next cycle of 7 years has not been cut. It has not been increased as much as the Commission had proposed it. So yes, there has been a cut, but there has been a cut from a base which the Commission had proposed, which was very significantly higher than the previous years. So I would not say we are where we should be, but I would not either say that nothing has been done, and that research and development, which is crucial to a number of major EU strategic goals, has been left aside. What I think we need to do is a better alignment between what EU research and development does in terms of funding, in terms of programs, in terms of projects, and what really matters, which is innovation. And you mentioned this report, which I did with colleagues from the world of science, industry, academy in 2017, which was named Lab Fab App, Lab for Lab, Fab for fabrication, App for application, which is a very strange name, but we choose in order to try and show that the real problem is not research. The real problem is innovation. And in many ways, we are still in a situation where, as we can say often, Europe is good at producing science with money, but is not good at producing money with science. So the real issue in my mind is not research, Although more could be done, while remembering that the EU research budget is a bit more than 10% of the total of EU public research, more than 85% of EU public research remains in the budgets of the member states. The real issue is innovation. How can you foster innovation deriving from disruptive research? And we know that there is another part of innovation that does not derive from disruptive research, I think, is a big question, which is why we tried to test something new. And we probably will have the occasion to come back later to this in the discussion, which is this notion of mission. I mean, like best systems of research, most of EU finance to research works with serendipity. Every good, great, successful funding of public research in the US, in Korea, in China, in Japan, in Israel, which are big competitors in this field, starts with serendipity, which is lots of people having lots of bright ideas, getting funding that can work or not work, and that's how disruptive research comes in. My final point will be that we believe, and I'm glad that the EU Commission, at the end of the day, adopted this new way as a test for a part of the next research program. We also have to work on the sort of non-serendipity-driven research, which is the idea of the moonshot. Let's agree on a major, very ambitious, transformative goal, and then align not only research and innovation funding, but also the rest of our policies. That's probably a way to test, but we'll come back to that later.
Well, that seems like an excellent point on which to bring in our final panelist, obviously coming from the industry perspective. Mark Oliver, do you have any concrete suggestions on this point about, producing innovation?
Yeah, I think research is research and innovation is innovation, in that sense that if we look at the big innovations that we have right now in the tech sector, they're largely driven by big companies that also invest in that. And this goes, if we look at the dominance from the US and China, it's so pervasive. Basically, every mobile app that is written today more or less has no chance but to run on technology that is either from the US and China. And even if there's a little bit of innovation being done in Europe, it kind of always has to go the step via the ocean, one side or the other side, to be actually made profitable in terms of applications. So I think Europe has a very big gap to actually fill. On the science side, I think it's doing rather well. I don't really know what the message then is that you can have either or the other. I think in order to get better innovation in Europe, we have to really work on the whole environment for innovation. And that has a lot of factors, and some of which are structural, some of which have to do with traditions in Europe. For example, a much weaker tradition of venture capital. If you look at the venture capital available in the US compared to what is available in Europe, there are orders of magnitude difference. So if you look at small companies, they all dream of being bought up by big American companies to have a profitable exit. So I think Europe has a long way to go. And it needs a strategy that stretches longer than 4 years. You have to think in terms of decades, really.
Obviously, one of the initiatives the Commission, I guess you would say, is experimenting with right now is this idea of the missions in Horizon Europe, the big interdisciplinary goal-focused research endeavors, and of which Pascal is heading up one. Pascal, I wanted to ask, I'm personally feel like I haven't heard much about these in 2020. So has this effort and this big push been somewhat derailed by the coronavirus crisis?
Oh, it hasn't, and I hope Jean-Éric Paquet will agree with me. Let me first say I 100% agree with what Marc-Olivier has said. Our problem in Europe is not research. If we benchmark the quality of our research against US, China, Japan, Korea, and the rest, we are okay. Where we have a big problem is on innovation. As he rightly said, a lot of the reasons why we have an innovation problem do not pertain properly to the research and development universe. Issues of culture, issues of finance, issues of not enough of a domestic unified level internal market and so on. But a part of that lies in the way we finance research, hence this an idea of missions, which, as you said, is a novelty. The reason why you haven't heard a lot so far is a good one, because you don't hear about an idea until you believe it's a good one, and you start believing it's a good one when you can see what this idea can bring, what sort of new plus thing it brings. And it took a lot of time for the people who've been in charge of devising what these 5 missions, one on cancer, one on soil regeneration, one on clean cities, one on adaptation to climate change, and one on regenerating the hydrosphere, all these being big targets for 2030, it takes a long time to draw a roadmap starting from where we are, a diagnosis, in my case, of how rapidly degrading seas, waters, ocean is going, properly analyzing what's the problem, then properly devising possible solution, then properly aligning resources, programs, policies, regulations in order to moonshot, in our case, clean European hydrosphere by 2030. Now, again, you will probably hear more of that in the future, hopefully, because we now have a clear idea. We are building pretty serious roadmaps on how to get there. Then the work of preparation will have been done, up then to the Commission, the Council, and the Parliament to decide whether or not they launch the mission, whether they push on the red button that sends it towards its objective, and that's probably going to be next year, if all goes well. So, answer to your question, we are in a preparation phase. It takes a lot of time to do this properly with proper scientific evidence, with proper policy advice. More news, I hope, in the moments to come, but that's for Jean-Éric Paquet, who's nearer than I am from the heart of the decision-making machine to say.
Indeed, and on that point, I mean, you mentioned these things take time to show results. I guess the question for me is, you know, given where we are right now and what we heard from Natalie at the beginning, do we have time, Jean-Éric? And what can we expect to concretely see in 2021?
Mm-hmm. I mean, we're always working against the clock, but I think we are doing much more than meets the eye. I think I would like to maybe first come back to the fact that Europe is quite amazing on science. You all said it, but I want to underline it. And I think the best example is indeed the COVID-19 vaccine. When you take BioNTech, which is the first vaccine with another one now seeking regulatory approval, it's a European-led, it's a European company. The founder and scientist is an ERC grantee. He's using European infrastructure, synchrotron infrastructures in Europe. Okay, then he partnered with a big American drug company, but the science and the vaccine are European science at its best. And I think this is really something which needs to be underlined. Then on innovation, I mean, I share to an extent what was said, but to an extent only. I think we are a little bit painting too gloomy a picture on innovation in Europe. And I think this is also detrimental because we are telling startups and founders that it can't be done in Europe. So yes, venture capital is not at the level of the US, but the fastest growing venture capital market as the pandemic hit was the European market. We are at more than 40% of the US market now. And so, yes, we don't grow as fast. I mean, European startups and growing firms, they don't burn capital in the same culture as in the US, but they grow as well. I think the real challenge is to equip our European startups with the means to grow in Europe, but not just grow, also have impact. And this is where the European Innovation Council comes in, which is the other big innovation in Horizon Europe alongside the missions. The European Innovation Council, if you want the equivalent of the European Research Council, the European Research Council, I think, is now very well established. It's more than 10 years old. It's what I call Europe's Nobel Prize factory. But the EIC, I think, will become Europe's unicorn factory, but unicorns with impact. What we hope to see with the EIC, complementing what is done at national level, is to fund disruptive deep tech innovation, so based also on science and engineering, where Europe is so strong. So not only digital innovations, where indeed we are quite challenged, but the next wave of innovation, we believe, is at the intersection of digital and the physical world, in health applications, in aviation, in transport, in energy. And here the EIC is already now in the pilot phase, showing that it can have a real impact. And we have had a number of calls on COVID-19, on the Green Deal. And we had thousands of amazing innovators which came to the EIC and selected not by European bureaucrats, but selected by venture capitalists, by scientists, by people from the startup ecosystem. And I hope we found great teams and great science. And I hope we will see results as we move forward, including with the equity which Europe is now holding in these companies. But if I come back to the missions, which I think, as Pascal very well described for the Starfish mission which he's leading, a lot happened in 2020, but indeed a little bit under the radar. It was the early phase of preparing the missions, and the mission boards have done amazing work. What we will see with the mission, I think, is a deep connection between research and innovation outcomes, so the knowledge created by research, the technology allowed by research, maybe also space to experiment these technologies in society, combined then with implementation plans which will, I hope, see the use of the full EU toolbox, other investment schemes, national investments, of course, regulation as well, and engagement with citizens and society to make the vision of these moonshots then a reality in society. It's about creating a common good in society at the outset, allowed, energized, pushed by research, but then delivered across the spectrum where industry, society, and public authorities come together. So it's a pretty spectacular concept of experimentation in policy making. We are now at a stage where the 5 mission boards handed over the recommendations: 3 million less dead from cancer in Europe by 2030, or 100 climate neutral cities by 2030. So very ambitious, very tall orders, but also very concrete visions for delivery. And we are now in the Commission looking at how we could translate this work into very concrete implementation plans, supported then in Horizon Europe, but then also beyond Horizon Europe. So we are in an intermediate phase, which is why this was probably a little less visible. But I expect that in 21, this will become much more visible. But it's also an issue about actors in Europe wanting to pick up the mission and be part of its delivery. So there will be a lot of engagement also at national and local level needed to make these missions a success.
Thank you. And just to flag, we'll be taking some questions from those of you online, since I can see they're flooding in. So just before we do, Natalie, what do you want to see in 2021 to kind of improve the outlook on the academia side?
We as an initiative, we've actually made 3 very concrete proposals to the European Commission to make most efficient use of resources and to try and find alternative sources of funding for the Horizon program. And so these are, first, rebalance the different pillars from the Horizon program. And here I have to disagree with Pascal Lamy. European research is not in a good state. The latest ERC funding call has had success rates of 7%. 7%. That's really quite astonishing. It means that 1 out of 15 researchers has been selected to continue their research project. A research project they have spent months, often 6 to 12 months, preparing, and many of them have not been selected because the proposal was of insufficient quality, but simply because the European Commission is not putting in sufficient funding to fund all these brilliant ideas. And when we talk about the COVID-19 vaccine and praise all these researches and innovation, that is very short-sighted to think this is only innovation. If these vaccines were successful, it's because someone before them, often 20, 30 years ago, have investigated how coronaviruses work, how vaccines development work, how the human body works. And that's why we can develop vaccines today. That's also the reason why we have no treatment for the COVID-19, because we simply don't understand it well enough, and we haven't invested sufficiently in research in the past to make this happen today. From the science world, the request, I think, from almost every single research organization in Europe is to rebalance the priorities and to prioritize Pillar 1, which is excellent science, ERC, and Marie Curie fellowships programs. The second one is asking the European Commission to emphasize research and development as part of the recovery and resilience facility that is supposed to be the pandemic recovery fund that will rebuild Europe after this massive crisis that we have witnessed. And so far, out of this 750 billion, only 5 billion are being invested in research, and not even basic research, only Pillar 2 or 3, I believe, from the Horizon program. That's 0.6% of this recovery fund. We think this is, largely insufficient, and there are ways to ask member states to prioritize research and development projects as part of the recovery and plans that will be sent to the European Commission. I don't think that's too much to ask for. And the third one is to establish a task force that will look at the different actors from the scientific world at the moment and look for solutions, how we can improve scientific research, working conditions, but also how can we make sure that we reach this utopic 3% of GDP funding spending goal that has been set 20 years ago, and we are still so far from ever reaching. So we have made these proposals actually to the European Commission a few weeks ago, but we've not received any answer so far.
Well, on that note, we have a question here that's very much related, directed at Jean-Éric. So the question from Angèle Landa-Basso is, what are the plans to create effective synergies between existing programs and the new EU funds for COVID recovery? Or I guess, to put it more crudely, what opportunities do you see for research and innovation to access some of the 750 billion in cash from this new EU recovery fund?
I think we do need more investment, indeed, in fundamental research, basic research, and I very much agree with that analysis of Nathalie Conrad that more needs to be done. Not all will be done at EU level, and I think the discussion needs to be, and indeed the Recovery and Resilience Facility offers a first opportunity for that. The discussion needs to be with all 27 member states to convince, and not all need to be convinced. I mean, certainly research ministers don't need to be convinced. Finance ministers sometimes have a bit of a more difficult conversation to indeed invest more in research and innovation, be it direct public investment in research and innovation, which is so necessary for universities, research organizations which are in basic research, or support to then the private investment, which is of course a very big component of the 3% overall target, on which progress is, I agree, too slow. And this is also very much what we hope to put again at the center of the discussion. And it took place between ministers last Friday with the European Research Area process, which is now starting again. And I think that is a particularly important development. But yes, synergies or links between funds are indeed critical. I don't want to say that it is entirely untapped potential, because this discussion is not completely new. But I think in contrast to the last MFF and maybe the two last MFF, we have, I think, now made a few steps which will allow effectively to link up different sources of funding and financing between EU instruments on the one hand, but also, I hope, between the national investment and the European investment. And there are very many examples, but let me indeed answer to your question with two specific funds which will support research and innovation investments. Regional policy funds to begin with. Innovation and research remains one of the very few priorities under regional policy instruments. And so member states will be able to use these resources to invest in research and research capacity, creating centers of excellence. And we will connect even further Horizon Europe and these instruments to ensure that we have maximum impact in developing excellence across all EU member states. The other one, the more recent one, is indeed the Recovery and Resilience Facility. Madame Conrad regretted the 5 billion only going directly into Horizon Europe. I mean, there would certainly have been a case, and the Commission proposed significantly more initially, 13 billion, to be implemented through Horizon Europe. So that's indeed a limited transfer. But at the same time, for the 600 billion plus, which will be the recovery and resilience plans from member states, all 27 member states have the opportunity to use funding under these plans to invest in research and innovation. And this can take two routes: either directly investing in reforming and improving their national system. And there are a few member states which are indeed looking at that in discussion with the Commission, or invest into more applied research and then connect their transformation agenda, their green, digital, and recovery agenda with research outcomes, promoting these research outcomes and pushing them into investments to green the economy or become more digital. So there will be, I expect, a significant share of the Recovery and Resilience Facility, which needs to be properly connected to Horizon Europe to indeed have the synergy appear and the impact being magnified. But it's an ongoing process. Yes.
And another popular question here from Jana. The previous Commission proposed 100 billion for research. The Parliament wanted 120 billion. It's now looking like it will get 85 billion. Did Europe fail its researchers? Jean-Éric?
No. I don't think one should put it in these terms. I mean, Pascal will tell you in a moment. When they did their LabFab app report, they analyzed the state of play, and taking notably the success rates and analyzing this vast portfolio of excellent projects which we don't fund for lack of budget. Pascal argued that even 160 billion euros would have been a reasonable amount, which could have been well justified and properly and usefully implemented. The Commission was, in the constraints which exist on a new budget, proposed an ambitious 100 billion budget. It was in fact a bit more for Horizon Europe itself, 94. And we are not very far from that headline figure now after the MFF agreement between Parliament and Council. So by and large, the EU budget, in particular because we are, as said now with 27 member states, not 28, is indeed increased. I mean, the Commission indicated, the President and Maria Gabriel, that we regret indeed the cuts which leaders decided in the summer. They were partly compensated now in the deal with the Parliament. But I think what is going to be absolutely critical is that this budget has maximum impact. So it is not just the headline figure. I know that this is, of course, an important benchmark, and it's an important benchmark of political choices. So I perfectly understand this discussion and the perception. But now that the deal is there, I think the challenge is to work from that significant, very significant budget, properly connected to national investments, to the other parts of the European budget, and then seek with the missions, with the European Innovation Council, yes, with the European Research Council, which, by the way, is the biggest component of the program, to seek maximum impact.
Thank you. And I see we're also getting quite a lot of questions about Brexit. So I'm going to dive in there and ask that question. I mean, the signs right now are that the UK government, for reasons ideological or otherwise, may not be a full part of Horizon Europe as a membership country. So my question, firstly to Jean-Eric, but also to other members of the panel, without Britain's involvement, will other external partners, the US, etc., see European research as less attractive?
I mean, we are absolutely attractive with 27 member states and associated countries. I think there should be absolutely no doubt. This is absolutely obvious. At the same time, it's also true that a Horizon Europe program and a European research policy, which closely associates also the United Kingdom, is more impactful and more powerful. So the benefit would be certainly visible there. This is part of the overall negotiations with the United Kingdom. I think we need to be patient a few more days. If we have this overall agreement with the United Kingdom, then I would very much expect that association to Horizon Europe is a component of it, and that would of course be a positive outcome. So a few more days to wait, but Europe as such is a key partner for the world.
So when you say a few more days, are you expecting an imminent announcement?
Can I come in on this one?
I'm like you. I'm following it, and I think it cannot last now many more months. Now it's going to take. It's coming to a head in the next days or maybe weeks, and I'm waiting as we all are.
Thank you, and Pascal.
Look, I think it's a major issue, and from my point of view, and I've been saying this in public for the last 5 years with the modest authority that retired commissioner, politician, whatever has, is that there should be no Brexit research and innovation-wise. There can be Brexit if the Brits so wish in a number of areas, like pesticide residues or size of bumpers or bird hunting, fine, but it would make absolutely no sense for UK to exit the European research area. After all, this is a model of association which we have with Switzerland, which we have with Norway, which we have with Israel, which works extremely well. These countries are within the European research area, and I cannot think 1 second then either from the British side from the EU side, the notion that Oxford and Cambridge would float somewhere on the middle of the Atlantic makes any sense. So no Brexit for research and development, whatever the modalities are and hopefully will be.
Mark Oliver, I'm interested from a company perspective, what's the right balance between competition and collaboration when it comes to working with academics or companies in countries such as a post-Brexit UK and others?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I've been shuttling between academia and companies basically during my entire career, and the biggest problem in research funding when it comes from companies and so on is that you fund research. That sounds a bit contradictory, but the point is my most successful projects between when I was in a company working with universities was always when it was about the topic rather than the funding, because and that may sound a bit strange to many. As soon as you put money on the table, then basically universities switch into, this is a grant and I can basically do whatever I want mode. Because in the end, universities, they have to get in grant money, and it doesn't really matter where it comes from. And there is very little, it's not like a contract in industry where you have to deliver something. The output is usually a paper or something like this. And that often does not go well together. So, and it may be different in polytechnical universities, but my experience is that it is quite difficult from a company perspective to work with universities. It may have been the few companies that I've been in, and that you have to be very careful how you construct your agreements. Because, yeah, as I said, as soon as you put money on the table, then the actual topic, what you want to have research, is often forgotten because there's the money.
So when we're looking at these kind of changing global relationships, Jean-Eric, do you think that a Biden administration in the US will make, for a different European-US research relationship? Is there any outreach from Brussels? Could the US be associating to Horizon Europe?
That would be an interesting conversation to be had. This is not obviously happening at this very, very early stage. We have, of course, continued to cooperate with many institutions in the US over the last 4 years, but it's also, of course, very visible that the Biden administration wants to put science again to the forefront, including of policy making, which I think is so important, and therefore the perspective for even more and closer interaction is clearly visible, and we will, of course, be keen to explore it. Where that leads us, you need to leave the Commission and the new administration a few months to look into that. But there are very many topics, of course, climate research to begin with, work on the pandemic in a much more joined up way for global solutions, not only vaccines, but also therapies. Madame Conrad rightly noted that on therapies, we are less advanced than on vaccine and on tests. All these are areas where there is no doubt that there would be certainly a lot of appetite, I expect, on both sides to engage. So to be looked at.
And what's also been interesting here in Brussels is that the ongoing crisis has prompted a push towards this idea of strategic autonomy and raised questions about Europe's technological sovereignty. So I wanted to ask you, Pascal, how do you see this affecting the EU's research and innovation agenda? Does what is conceivably a more inward-looking push potentially conflict with a kind of collaborative global perspective on research and innovation?
I think we have to look at examples of successful technological and industry building, like the US, like Israel, to take two very, very different animals, to see that it has worked because it was open. So the notion of strategic autonomy, in my view, which, by the way, I understand in Brussels corridors, which Politico knows well, is called down there, up there, in there, open strategic autonomy. Now, I recognize it may look a bit of an oxymoron, like what Delors called federation of nation states, or what we call our devise, unity in diversity, but strategic autonomy does not mean closeness. It means we have to build a European Union that is less vulnerable than it is, notably to US or to China. US, not for ideological reasons, although some of us had a bit of a fear during the Trump years. China is more complex. I don't think strategic autonomy means closing Europe. It means investing more where we have a comparative advantage. And there are areas where we have to develop a comparative advantage so that what has happened to us for the last 30 years, which is that we've lost ground at the frontier of technology as compared to our major competitors in the world, in my view, building a better strategic autonomy means regaining a part of what we've lost at the frontier of technology. So this is not a question of whether research is open or closed. We know full well that in today's world, research is open. Look at what happened with the vaccine on the virus without any instruction or even authorization from their public funders. Chinese, Americans, Europeans, including Chinese, started working together on the definition of what this virus was like, what its DNA was like, what could be done at this and this part of this DNA. So research is open. Strategic autonomy means building more of our own capacity to be back to where we were, i.e., for instance, when the first mobile phone standard was created, it was the European one. The sort of GSM-1 was a European standard. So we have to go back to this situation, but I think we can perfectly do that, and this is the very point of the discussion which I think we've had, in keeping research open.
So just one follow-up on that point. You mentioned research is open. There's an interesting debate going on right now at the World Trade Organization, obviously an organization you know well, about suspending intellectual property rights for coronavirus-related pharmaceutical developments. And the EU is opposing that move. I wondered, where do you stand on that issue? Is that the right way for the EU to be going here?
Look, I was the one who, 20 years ago, as a European Trade Commissioner, made sure that the WTO, the GATT, at the time of WTO, trade-related intellectual property agreement, the famous TRIPS agreement, would enlarge a window which exists in intellectual property production for public health emergencies. We've always had, in the WTO, a disposition that intellectual property can be waived in case of public health emergency. This is called compulsory licensing. This exists, and states, sovereigns, have the right to impose waiving IP if this corresponds to a health emergency. That's great. If you have a pharma industry, you can arm twist if they don't provide you with the proper prices. We had a problem at the time that, of course, this only works if you have a domestic pharma industry. And we invented at the time a special waiver for poor countries that have no pharma industry domestically and that can use compulsory licensing for imports. So this waiver exists. I know and I've been discussing this for many, many years, that some, notably well-intentioned NGOs, and I usually credit NGOs with good intentions, believe that the process that leads there, that leads to a poor country using this compulsory licensing to import medicines can be too cumbersome. And I don't disagree with that. Now, legally, the thing exists, and I'm among those who've been campaigning, including as chair of the Paris Peace Forum a few weeks ago when we collected 500 million euros, which is 100 million of vaccine doses for poor countries. I think at the end of the day, IP protection will not be the problem. If countries on this planet find the 20 billion that are needed to cover the 4 billion humans who are not covered today by vaccine pre-purchasers, IP will not be the problem.
So we're nearing the end of our debate, and I just wanted to give each panelist the opportunity to give a final answer to a question which seems to wrap up a lot of aspects we've covered. Looking at our poll results on the question, do you think the EU has a clear vision for research and innovation? The top answer was yes, but could do better at communicating it. And one of the questions we've had is, okay, so what can researchers and industry concretely do on the communication side? So with that, I'd ask each panelist to state the one thing that they would concretely like to achieve in 2021 to help us better tackle the next crisis from research and innovation. Mark Oliver, starting with you.
I'm not really sure I have an opinion on it.
J'ai fini dans une seconde.
I think communication is undergoing a big change in however you see it. I mean, in science, a traditional way of publicizing results is writing scientific papers, which are not very accessible to many people. And the step of distilling what is published in scientific journals into something that the general public then understands and values, that step is, I think, relatively undefined. It's usually up to journalists who feel encouraged to do so, or you have very big breakthroughs where then the institutions do their own press coverage. But I think if we look at what is happening for example, in machine learning, AI, and so on, then a lot of the publication move away from traditional journals really into demonstratable pieces of technology, software that is implemented and then can try it out by many people. And the impact that these kind of renegade publications have is much larger than what we see in traditional publishing. And you see it also in certain disciplines. Some of them have already done this shift. Others are going towards that shift, that a lot is happening there. I'm not sure that this is something that can be solved at the level of policies, but rather at the level of universities, also selection panels for faculty positions and so on. They have to recognize that the landscape when it comes to publishing results is changing, and that they have to move away from rather traditional measures and also include other medias and methods that are more up to date. That's my statement here. Thank you.
So Pascal, a concluding remark from you. What's the one thing you would concretely prioritize in 2021?
Once upon a time, President Kennedy visited Cape Canaveral. He had a big delegation. He got lost and entered the corridor where a guy was with a broom cleaning the corridor. And President Kennedy said, "Oh man, what are you doing here? With this broom, you're cleaning the corridor." No, said the guy. "Mr. President, I'm trying to help sending a man on the moon." That's my answer to your question. What can we do to make people, to make research matter for people, which at the end of the day probably is the right answer to the question Natalie posed at the beginning of the discussion, which is why don't they do more? Missions, a clear objective, clean cities, clean hydrosphere, whatever regeneration of soils, people will understand what research is about and probably a bit more what Europe is about. So that's my answer.
Thank you. So Natalie, in one or two sentences, what do you concretely want to see in 2021?
Well, actually, I would like to see a European Commission that stands up for European research and stands up for European researchers, because unfortunately, you ask the question whether Europe was failing researchers, you ask Jean-Éric Paquet, but actually, we as researchers have a completely different perspective here. And if you ask us if Europe has failed us, the young generation of European researchers, the answer is very clearly yes. Researchers features very little in the main priorities of the European Commission and almost inexistent in the political guidelines of the European Commission President. The European Commission is hiding behind difficult budget negotiations and decisions taken by the Council, but the European Commission President has never stood up to defend European research and to prevent the destruction of European ambitions of research and prosperities that rely on scientific research and that will inevitably follow from the budget restrictions we have seen.
Thank you. So Jean-Éric, what are you going to do to address that in 2021? I'm not sure if we have a sound issue.
Apologies, I had muted. Apologies. No, the short reply is we hope to have a Horizon Europe program to implement. That really is what we need, and that really requires member states at long last to lift vetoes and other restrictions to the deal on the MFF. The longer reply, which I think is also relevant, is that a bit like Pascal, but I think Nathalie will also agree, I hope, is that we need to much more than we have done so far, and this is not a European Commission responsibility, it's everyone in Europe. We need more engagement with citizens on science, and this is not just outreach and communication. Yes, that matters, but I think that the science agenda needs to be shaped by citizens much more than has been the case so far, including to elevate their concerns on new developments in AI, in plant gene editing, on vaccines. I think if citizens were part of the choices made in labs, in industry, in research policies, they would impact on them, and hopefully they would carry these choices much more than is sometimes the case in large segments of the European population. So to see the green digital transformation and a genuine resilience from pandemics, we need science which agenda is set with citizens. It's not an easy one. It's in fact a particularly complex and long-term one, but I hope we can make first steps next year already, and that would also then help the overall science agenda, including in the national political debates.
And with that, I'm going to thank you all very much for your participation and hand back to James in the studio.
Thank you, Laura, and thank you to all of our speakers and to all of you for joining us, those who sent their questions in on Slido and voted. We'd also like to thank our partner for the event, eBrains, for making this possible. You can send us feedback on the event at events@politico.eu, so please do email us if you'd like to send some feedback. We'll be hosting more events in this virtual format, newsmaker interviews, panel discussions, and the like in the coming weeks. You can check out these future events on politico.eu/events/future-events, or just search for Politico Events and doubtless you'll find us. So thank you very much for joining us, and hopefully see you again soon.